Three, two, and one. Cindy.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third FPCI Ambassadorial Lecture in cooperation with the Canadian Embassy in Jakarta. FPCI is proud to host this series in which today we have here with us His Excellency Ambassador Cameron MacKay, Ambassador of Canada to Indonesia. Welcome, Ambassador. So, throughout this past month, we've had our first and second ambassadorial lecture in Makassar and Surabaya, respectively. And today we are joined by students from Surakarta, namely Universitas 11 Maret, Universitas Muhammadiyah Surakarta, and Universitas Slamet Riyadi. So, welcome everybody, and thank you to our FPCI chapters for tuning in. I believe it's quite a rare opportunity for there to be a platform that is able to bridge the gap between students and ambassadors. So I'm certain that we'll have a very interesting and insightful discussion today. My name is Cindy, and I will be the moderator for today's event. And ladies and gentlemen, with this lecture series, we aim to be able to provide more understanding on the bilateral relations between Canada and Indonesia. Along with that, we will get to know the Canadian perspective and understand how they see the world, as well as learn more about their country and their embassy. So please don't be shy and feel free to ask as many questions as you can. And I would like to remind you that at the end of this discussion, the Canadian Embassy has prepared a fun quiz for us, and winners of this quiz will be sent a special prize from the Embassy. So to be able to join the quiz later on, be sure to follow and check out the Embassy's Instagram page at Canada in Indonesia, as there will be several clues for the quiz later on. Also, don't forget to share moments with us from this event by tagging at FPC Indo and at Canada in Indonesia on your social media posts. So before we begin today's discussion, we have a few opening remarks. So may I invite the Director of the Center for Cultural Studies and Social Change of Universitas Muhammadiyah Surakarta, Dr. Andes Yayah Kisbiah, MA. Bapak Yayah, are you there?
Ibu Yaya is already here, but yeah. Or maybe we can start the remarks later on.
All right. Perhaps we'll move that to closing. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us go ahead and begin today's discussion. So, may I invite His Excellency Ambassador Cameron MacKay. The floor is yours.
Well, first, if I can say thank you to everyone, to FPCI for organizing today's event. I'm really very excited about it. To you, Cindy, for facilitating and hosting. But most importantly, I think for the students who have taken the time today to join me from Solo for this discussion about Canada and Canada-Indonesia bilateral relations. I hope you find it interesting. And I do hope that one day we can actually meet in person. I would love to travel and see you at your university. But unfortunately, of course, because of COVID, that's simply not possible at this time. I want to come back in a moment and speak briefly about Canada, about the priorities of my embassy, about the impact of COVID-19 on international affairs, etc. But before doing so, I wanted to help you as Indonesian students maybe better understand Canadians, how Canadians think, what Canada is about, and I think this actually is an important approach with respect to diplomacy, because as a diplomat, it's very important to understand how other people see things, how people from other countries see things, and to understand, therefore, how those people see you. So if I can ask you to indulge me for a moment, I'd like you to imagine briefly that you are not Indonesian, that instead you are Canadian. Like Indonesia, Canada is extremely diverse, both with respect to its geography and its people. So as a Canadian, you might have grown up on a vast open prairie dominated by grain farms and cattle ranches. Or you might come from a temperate, cool rainforest on the edge of the Pacific Ocean. Or you might have grown up in a small wooden house that your ancestors built in a small fishing village on the Atlantic Ocean. But most likely, you are from a modern city of at least 1 million people. And whether your family is high income or low income, you almost certainly received a world-class education at a public, that is to say, a government-run elementary and secondary school. And now you are studying at an excellent public university. We have no private universities in Canada. The tuition you pay is very low compared to a developed country like the United States. And if you cannot afford to pay it, the government will loan you the money to get an excellent post-secondary education. And by the way, if you get ill, whether you are rich or poor, you will go to a public hospital and the government will pay the bill. That is to say, all of the other Canadians as taxpayers will pay for your medical care. It is possible that your ancestors were Aboriginal North Americans, but it is much more likely that they were immigrants, probably from Europe or from Asia. They likely left their home country to seek better economic opportunities and to live in a country where the government is democratically elected and therefore dedicates itself to making life better for its citizens. If you are from Toronto, Canada's largest city, you speak English at school or at work and on the street. But there is a 50% chance that you are an immigrant born outside Canada. So at home with your family, you likely speak one of more than 100 languages that are spoken in that city. And your parents may have sent you to a language school on Saturdays to ensure that you learned how to speak good Greek or Ukrainian or Mandarin or Bahasa Indonesia. The same would be true if you are from Vancouver, Canada's most Asian city, where more than 70 languages are spoken and about 50% of the residents do not speak English in their homes. And of course, if you are from Montreal, the second largest French-speaking city in the world after Paris, you almost certainly speak French at home and on the street, plus excellent English when you need to. And you dress more fashionably than your English-speaking classmates. Let me turn now to a brief video clip to give you an even better sense of what life is like as a student in Canada.
When you think of endless possibilities, what do you think of?
We think of potential.
We think of self-fulfillment.
And we think of the freedom to choose a life and future on our own terms.
We think of cultural diversity, endless horizons, and infinite opportunities.
And we think of here, and here, and of here. These are the places where students from around the world come to be challenged, to grow, and to immerse themselves in a rich and high-quality learning environment.
It's where you'll find the visionaries, the innovators of tomorrow, the challenge seekers, and the future leaders.
It's in these halls, these theaters, and these labs that theory meets practice, and effort and action leads to real futures.
We believe that Canada is the best place in the world to get an education, because no other place offers such a world of possibilities.
So for most non-Canadians, people who don't live in Canada, it's very difficult to imagine really just how multicultural and diverse Canada is and how that affects our worldview, how we see everyone else. To ensure that we all get along and prosper within Canada, we have tolerance built into our DNA, which is not to say that all Canadians are tolerant. Of course, we too have bigots and racists and misogynists and religious fundamentalists. But the great majority of Canadians have no tolerance for those who hate based on the color of someone's skin or their gender or their beliefs about religion or who you choose to love and to marry. Now I'd like you to imagine that you have come from that background. You've grown up as a Canadian, and now you work as a Canadian policymaker and a diplomat. There's a photo from the United Nations, for example. To be a diplomat, you first need to understand your neighbors. To the north of Canada, just across the North Pole, is Russia, formerly the Soviet Union. And to the west, just across the Pacific Ocean, is Asia. The closest are China, Japan, and Korea. And further south, countries like Thailand and Indonesia, which as a Canadian you have always believed is a tropical paradise. To the east of Canada, across the Atlantic Ocean, is Europe, home to the great wars of the last century, and now home to the European Union. And of course, to the south, a country with whom you share the world's largest and longest undefended border, with the United States of America. 200 years ago, you fought a war with that neighbor and burned the capital, Washington, to the ground. But since then, you have both agreed that war makes no sense. So instead, you have almost entirely integrated your economies. You don't just trade, you make things together, from cars and aircraft to software and food. So as a nation, Canada is surrounded by superpowers, including the world's greatest superpower, the next up-and-coming superpower, and ancient superpowers who still aspire to global greatness. So let me summarize. As a Canadian, you come from an incredibly diverse and tolerant country where the government strives to ensure equality of opportunity. Your country has serious problems, like all countries do, but as a diplomat, you know that your country and all of its citizens will be better off in a world that is peaceful and tolerant, where individuals are free to think and say what they want, and to do business and to trade freely, and to be protected by the rule of law at home and internationally. A world of might makes right, where the rich and powerful can get what they want, regardless of fairness or the impact on the poor and the weak, is not a world that reflects your interests or your values. So that is how, as the ambassador of Canada to Indonesia, I see the world. So with that in mind, now let me speak a little bit about how I see the world in the middle of the greatest pandemic that we have seen in at least a century. COVID, of course, is clearly not just a public health crisis. The need for physical distancing to control the spread of the virus has triggered a global economic crisis, which is in turn affecting both domestic politics in all of our countries and the global diplomatic scene. As I see it, many of the political and diplomatic pressures and trends that we saw before the crisis have now been accelerated. The great power rivalry between the world's two leading countries and economies has intensified. Many countries are witnessing increased nationalism and xenophobia. Authoritarian governments are not letting a good crisis go to waste, and some are using the crisis to their advantage to securitize the response and strengthen their control over their populations. In many countries, there is increased concern about personal privacy, and technological surveillance is being exacerbated by the use of tracking apps used or imposed by states. Coupled with this are intensified concerns about bad actors, leveraging our increasing dependence on digital technology, including to influence public opinion through misinformation campaigns. So cybersecurity has never been more important than it is now. And unfortunately, especially in the first few weeks of the crisis, many countries initially responded with a me too, me first attitude, coupled with blatant protectionism. that further undermined the credibility of the multilateral system that we all helped to build in the decades since the Second World War. And I'm referring now, of course, to the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the Bretton Woods institutions, etc. For Canada, and I think for Indonesia and other middle powers as well, these are frightening developments. Our countries will not prosper in a world of the law of the jungle and might makes right. So we and many other countries are instead committed to improving and adapting the so-called rules-based international order to ensure that we all benefit from the protection of international rule of law. Before the crisis, Canada and Indonesia had a strong relationship and roughly balanced trade in goods and services of about $4 billion a year. Canadian direct investment into Indonesia in 2018 was $3.2 billion, and our second largest investment destination in the ASEAN region after Singapore. Indonesians, by turn, had invested roughly $84 million into Canada. Before COVID, over 2,000 Indonesian young people were studying in Canada, and Canada welcomed roughly 27,000 Indonesian tourists every year. Almost 100,000 Canadians visited Indonesia every year. And clearly that's all changed now. Less so with respect to trade in goods than with respect to services sectors that are dependent on travel. Tourism is the best example. We need to work hard to limit the damage and lay the groundwork for a solid recovery in the medium term and the long term. Clearly, no one country can tackle these challenges alone. For Canada's part, we're working hard with countries like Indonesia in multilateral institutions and groupings like the G20, APEC, and of course the WTO to help us move toward a sustainable and resilient economic recovery. When it comes to multilateral institutions that are under unprecedented pressure, the Canadian view is we cannot give up on them. So within the G20, we're working with Indonesia and others to commit ourselves to preserve the flow of vital medical supplies, critical agricultural products, and other essential goods and services. And under the leadership of Canadian Foreign Minister Champagne, foreign ministers of several G20 countries, including Indonesia, and other non-G20 nations have established a new ad hoc grouping, the Multilateral Coordination Group on COVID-19. The group so far has focused on facilitating the cross-border movement of goods, services, and people by maintaining open and connected supply chains to help ensure that those most in need receive access to vital medical treatment. And in that group, Indonesian Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi has been leading the discussions on the role of the private sector in ensuring that we keep supply chains open. Looking ahead to a post-pandemic future, which is still some ways away now, Canada continues to take a leadership role in the revitalization of the World Trade Organization through its convening of the so-called Ottawa Group, which is working on options for renewing that critical organization. So as we all struggle to manage our response to the COVID crisis in the short term, we should also keep a focus on our long-term strategy and make decisions now that will pay off in the years to come. As Canadian hockey legend Wayne Gretzky famously said, "Don't skate to where the puck is, skate to where it's going to be. Think ahead." With that, I'd be happy to open up and take questions on any topic. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ambassador. So let's go ahead and dive into our question and answer session. So I will be taking 3 questions per batch, which will be then answered by Ambassador MacKay before moving on to the next batch. So to ask your question, you can use the raise hand feature on your Zoom app by clicking participants and selecting raise hand on the bottom right. And I will be randomly selecting from those who have raised their hands. So you can start raising your hands to ask your question. And please feel free to ask any question and don't be shy. We encourage everybody to please raise your hands to ask any question you want. I'm sure Ambassador would love to answer your questions. So you can start raising your hands. All right, we have one from UMS, Cindy Yanwar Wibowo.
Okay, it's my voice is can hear.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, I will take some question that what is a struggle and what is a difficult thing that to be an ambassador in other country that you have ever seen that it will be get impact on your nation. Thank you.
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges of being a diplomat is also the most fun of being a diplomat, and that is living in a foreign country. So it means being away from your family, it means being away from your culture and all of the things that you are familiar with. And of course, during the COVID pandemic, for example, I have not seen my own family for some months now. I have been unable to travel. So that's one of the biggest sort of personal challenges of being an ambassador. I would say one of the other sort of personal challenges with being a diplomat, and I spoke to it a little bit earlier, is learning to understand the perspective of another culture and of another country. So it's very common when you first arrive living in a foreign country. At first, for the first few weeks, it's all very exciting. It's like being a tourist. Everything is new and fun and exciting. And after a few months, you look at what people do or the decisions the government makes or the people that you meet and you're socializing with, and you think, why do they do that? Why do they think differently than me? Shouldn't everyone think the way I think? And of course, that's not possible, nor is it desirable. But sometimes it can be a bit bewildering or a bit confusing to be living in a foreign culture and adopting that culture's way of seeing the world. But that is a key aspect of being a diplomat, and maybe that brings me to the last point of the professional challenges. Sometimes those differences in perspective translate into very different government decisions about what to do about one situation or another. So it can be very frustrating as a diplomat sometimes to see tensions rising with respect to security or with respect to trade or any other matter of international affairs. And you think, why can we not all just get along and cooperate and make the system work for all of us? But sometimes that's a very difficult challenge to face because different countries have very different perspectives and very different desired outcomes, again, on security, trade, or any other matter, that can make it very difficult to have them see one another's point of view and then arrive at a cooperative solution. And that can be a great frustration as a diplomat.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now we have another question here. Unfortunately, he can't, his mic is broken, so he can't speak directly, but he has a question from Hussein Ali from OMS. His question is, what is the Canadian government's policy in preventing an even worse collapse in economy during this pandemic? And what is your policy to keep public services in place, whereas people are struggling to pay taxes?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that the Canadian government has taken a number of short-term measures to try to keep the economy going. And then now we're trying to build our response over the longer term. So over the short term, first, frankly, it was a little bit easier in a country like Canada than it is in a place like Indonesia because we have fewer people working in the so-called informal sector. So Indonesia faces very special challenges with roughly 70 million people working in the informal sector without an employer. They're self-employed, they're working on the street. In order to make money, they need to have contact with other people to work in the market or whatever that may be. We have people who do this kind of work in Canada as well, but fewer of them, a smaller percentage of the population. So for professional people like myself, it's not such a big adjustment to simply work from home and use our computers and telephones to do our work. But it's been particularly hard in Canada for people who own their own businesses, hair salons, barbershops, restaurants, all of these things have been closed for months. The government response to that was to provide basically financial support to these people. So if you are low income or you're self-employed, and if you need money from the government, basically you can apply. And within, I think, 3 weeks of the global pandemic being declared by the WHO, the Canadian government was already issuing checks to all of the citizens who needed some money to help them pay their rent, etc. So we had short-term responses like that. We had loans for small businesses. We had a number of emergency programs, we called them, to kind of provide immediate financial relief to people who would have otherwise been completely out of a job or not able to pay for food or the rent on their home or their apartment. The challenge now will be, over the longer term, how do we sustain a recovery? Because like Indonesia and every other country, these programs are very expensive. The Canadian deficit has grown enormously, and the Canadian debt has grown very significantly. So it will take us many years basically to pay this money back. The government spent money over the last few months that it did not have in its pocket. And we will all have to pay, I think, higher taxes and fees for many, many years to come to help dig us out of that. So the government now is working on programs to try to re-stimulate the economy, in particular around infrastructure, green infrastructure, and trying to think ahead about what kind of an economy do we really want in the coming years. And the government will be investing in that. So the details of this have not yet been announced, but I do think that a part of that will be to ensure that the global economy stays open. What we do not want is a repeat of the 1930s, where after the stock market crash of 1929, you may know, in the West, the New York Stock Exchange collapsed. There was an economic crisis. Countries closed their borders. They raised tariffs. They tried to produce everything themselves, stop trading with the neighbors. And that led to a 10-year, basically a 10-year recession, well, what we call the Great Depression. So we are quite committed to avoiding that kind of outcome, which is why I mentioned earlier the trade and investment. It's so important to keep trade and investment flowing internationally. That will certainly be part of our economic recovery strategy.
Great, thank you. We earlier had a student that raised their hand from UMS, Dimas Rizky Pangestu. Would you like to ask your question?
Good afternoon, Sir Ambassador. I want to ask, is there a scholarship program from the Canadian government? And I also heard that Indonesian is used as subject. Is that true? Thank you.
Just on this, on a scholarship program, it certainly is possible to study in Canada. And there are some scholarship programs. In particular, we have one that's ongoing now that's actually for mid-career professionals. So if you're already working in the government, it's frankly for older people who are already working to go back and then get a professional designation. But after this call, I will ask my staff to circulate to you the links to our website, which provides further information about how to study in Canada. But I'm sorry, the second part of your question I didn't quite hear.
Could you repeat your second question? Yeah.
I also heard that Indonesian is used subject. Is that true?
You mean Indonesian language, bahasa?
Yes, bahasa.
So there's a small community of just a few thousand people of Indonesian descent in Canada who use bahasa in Canada. I'm sure, in their homes, etc. It's not a widely spoken language in Canada. We do have predominantly English and French. We also have almost 1 million Chinese Canadians who are speaking a Chinese dialect at home, about 1 million Indian Canadians who are speaking one of the Indian dialects at home, Vietnamese, Filipino speaking Tagalog, etc. So many languages spoken, and Bahasa also. We have more than 100 languages, foreign languages spoken in Canada, but Bahasa is a relatively small one in Canada.
Okay, thank you. We also have another question from Anita Efiani. Unfortunately, she can't use her mic, but she wants to ask this. Could you explain the current relations between Canada and China, as well as Canada and the US?
Mhm.
Thank you.
Maybe let me first speak about the Canada-US relationship, and then I'll turn to China. And so Canada and the United States have many, many similarities. We, North American countries, we sit in the same place geographically in the world. We look across, we share the same oceans, etc. I mentioned in my presentation, we share the world's longest undefended border. It's not a militarized border. We gave up on conflict with the United States over 200 years ago. We have an extremely intense bilateral trading relationship. The world's largest bilateral trading relationship is between Canada and the US. It's a relatively easy border to cross. We have many Canadians who also have US citizenship and Americans who have Canadian citizenship. At any given time, there are almost 1 million Canadians living in the United States and working in the US. So we have this very close relationship. We share, English-speaking Canadians share a language with the US. So several of the music stars or movie stars that you may think of as being American, in fact, are Canadians who have moved to Hollywood to become stars, etc. We kind of look and sound the same. That said, there are some real differences between Canada and the United States. Our system of government is quite different. The Canadian system of government is we have a parliamentary democracy and a constitutional monarchy. It's closer to the United Kingdom system than it is to the United States. We have no president, for example. We have a prime minister. We have no Congress. Instead, we have a parliament. So this very different system of government has produced very different outcomes, and I described some of them in my presentation. Much broader public education system in Canada, public health system, basically a more generous and better developed social welfare system. So in terms of social welfare, Canada is more like Sweden or Denmark than it is like the United States. So we're very close to the Americans. We consider them to be some of our best friends, but we do often disagree, of course. And we know our friends, the Americans, well enough that when we do disagree, we're not afraid to tell them that we think they're wrong. So I'll give you two big examples in foreign policy. The Vietnam War in the 1960s, Canada thought at the time that this was a mistake, and we did not participate in the Vietnam War. We did not participate in the second Iraq War. These were areas where I think our American friends would have liked us to go along with them, and we simply did not. We thought it was a mistake and continue to think so. Now, if I can turn to China, Canada has very long historic links to China, including Chinese citizens who have come to live in Canada over 150 years ago, is when Chinese people first started coming. So we have many Canadians are of Chinese descent and have lived in Canada for generations. And particularly in the last 40, 50 years, we've had even greater waves of Chinese coming to live in Canada, Chinese Canadians, in particular from Hong Kong, but from all regions of China. And I'll give you the Hong Kong, Canada example. Very close ties with Hong Kong. We have 300,000 Canadian passport holders who live in Hong Kong. So we have very close ties with China. We have a lot of trade with China. We have long cultural and historic links with China. Chinese Canadians helped to build the country, and we all recognize that. And I think, frankly, for most Canadians, great respect for Chinese civilization and for everything that China has given to the world. At the moment, however, diplomatically, tensions between Canada and China are very high. Canada disagrees with China, as we do with the United States and other countries at times. We disagree with China with respect to the management of Hong Kong. We're concerned about the South China Sea. We're concerned about rule of law in China. And there's a very particular dispute now about Canada arresting a senior Chinese business leader for very good reasons under rule of law, and China retaliating by arresting arbitrarily 2 Canadian citizens in retaliation for that. So tensions, frankly, are a little bit high between the Canadian government and the Chinese government. But my own view is that relations between Canadian people and Chinese people are strong and warm, and frankly, always will be.
Thank you, Ambassador. And now for the next question. From Unisri, we have Jihan Nurabidah. From Unisri, Jihan Nurabidah, would you like to ask your question?
Hello.
From me?
Oh.
Can I ask a question? It is from UNS, Shiva Nadila.
Is Jihan there? Sorry.
All right, maybe I will ask my question first. Can I?
Okay.
Sure.
All right. So thank you so much, Ambassador, for the opportunity. It is a great opportunity for us. And someday I will really hope that Canada Embassy with Universitas 11 Maret will have a good cooperation. So my question is, Canada and Indonesia has the same similarity of multiculturalism, but I almost never heard that Canada has a problem according to multiculturalism. It is very different with Indonesia. So based on your experience in both countries, in Canada and Indonesia, do you have like an advice to Indonesia, maybe how to prevent the multiculturalism problem in Indonesia? Is it from the environment, or is it from the education, or etc.? Maybe you can tell us about that. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, let me say, I think, of course, you know, Indonesia, like every country in the world, has problems, and the solution to those problems are for Indonesians to discuss and to decide. But I can tell you a little bit about why we have been relatively successful with multiculturalism in Canada. And again, it goes back to some points that I made in my presentation, that Canada really is a country of immigrants. So almost everyone in Canada comes from somewhere else. Within recent generations, they have come from Europe, from Africa, from Asia, Latin America. There are, of course, the original Canadians, but they are a relatively small portion of the population now. Canada is largely more than 95% populated with people who have come from somewhere else. So I think everyone in Canada realizes that we are all relatively new to this country, and we're building something new. Canada is only 153 years old this year. It's a relatively new country, but an old democracy. We've been a democracy from the beginning. And so I think, I mentioned earlier tolerance being in our DNA. I think because we have all come from somewhere else, the climate in Canada can be difficult. In order to survive, everyone needed to cooperate and get along. And we have indeed now built one of the most, I would say, cooperative societies on the planet, despite the fact that we all come from different places. But I think, in fact, it's because we all come from different places. Immigration is a different issue for example, for the countries of Europe, where if you're German or you're French or you're Swedish, you feel like, I am German and my family has been here for thousands of years, and now there are new people coming to my country and they are different. Canadians can't really have that view because we've all only been there for, almost all only been there for a few generations. I think, I find the Indonesian model actually incredibly impressive, that right from the establishment of Indonesia as an independent country immediately after the Second World War, that Indonesia immediately established these core principles of tolerance, including religious tolerance. And that is just incredibly fundamental to peace in society. There's no society is pure where everyone belongs to exactly the same religion or thinks exactly the same way as everyone else. And it's important to recognize that right from the beginning, as Indonesia has done. So ideally, increased cooperation, dialogue, tolerance, respect for other people. These are all the core elements that make for any successful society. We have to accept that there will always be a small minority of people who are intolerant and bigoted and insist that other people think as they do. But those people will, in the long run, never win the day.
All right, thank you. And for our next question, we'll go back to Jihan from Unisri. Would you like to ask your question? Jihan? All right, if not, then we'll move on to the next student. From UMS, we have Fabian Aflah.
Okay, thank you for, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for letting me speak to Ambassador. I have a question, but this is not original from me. This is from my friend Reski. We know if Canada have a different climate from with Indonesia. We have 2 seasons. Canada have 4 seasons. So the question is, how about agriculture in Canada? How about dynamic there? How hard planting in there, and what are the main plan there? Are Canada export the agricultural commodity to other nation or no? Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Great question. And I think that's a really key difference between Canada and Indonesia, of course, is the climate. So as you said, Canada very much has 4 distinct seasons, and we have tremendous variability in the weather between those seasons. So, for example, in the city of Ottawa, the capital city where I was last living, there can be temperature changes through the year of up to 70 degrees centigrade, 70. So in the summer, right now in Ottawa, it can sometimes be as hot as 35 degrees, a little bit warmer than it is here in Jakarta today. And in the winter, it can get as cold as -35. So if you can imagine the freezer in your refrigerator, it's frankly much colder than that. Not all winter, but for a few days every winter. So huge variation in temperature. Canada is also a geographically enormous country. It's the 2nd largest country in the world after Russia. And I showed you some photos earlier of the diversity of everything from thousands of kilometers of wide open, relatively flat prairie to high mountains. And we also have orchards, vineyards, etc. So what does this mean for what we grow? We have a shorter growing season. We're basically not farming or growing anything in the winter unless it's indoors, unless it's something very high value. We're growing it indoors. But outdoors in the summer are very highly productive for things like wheat, grains, canola, all of which we export to Indonesia. So wheat, for example, is one of our major Canadian exports to Indonesia. Indonesia, of course, doesn't really produce much wheat on its own, but if you eat Indomie noodles, you are eating Canadian wheat, which is a key ingredient to those wheat-based noodles. And other oil seeds and grains, fertilizer, potash fertilizer is another major export of ours. We do also grow fruits, temperate fruits. So we have a large selection of apples, blueberries, peaches. We do grow grapes. We produce wine in Canada, for example, and we have a very significant meat industry. So beef, for example, my cousin is a farmer of Canadian beef and cattle. So we're very competitive global exporters of beef and other meats.
All right, thank you. And for our next question, from UMS, Intan Eriantini.
Okay, thank you very much. It's such the honorable to me. I have the question that is about the. We know that in this condition we are in the pandemic. So I want to ask about the how the economy in Canada still ongoing, and then how about the money income? Is it increase it or decrease? And also how about the free trade agreement between Indonesia and Canada? Thank you.
Mhm. Great question, especially the last part. That's a very prescient question. So the economy in Canada right now is frankly very weak. We are severely impacted, like every country, by the COVID pandemic. The Canadian government at the national level and all of the Canadian provinces reacted quite quickly. Once the WHO announced the global pandemic, we basically had a very significant lockdown. I would say the lockdown in Canada was firmer and lasted longer than it did in certainly in Jakarta than in Indonesia. We shut down more of the economy faster. Again, we have very different kind of economy in Canada, so it was easier for us to do so. We have a much smaller informal sector. But nevertheless, the impact on the Canadian economy will be very significant. So economic growth will probably decline by 6, 7, 8% this year. It's very difficult to know so far. Trade has declined quite significantly. We're hoping for a relatively, for a bounce back, an economic bounce back, but that will be some months away. So I mentioned a bit earlier some of the programs the Canadian government has initiated to help Canadians survive this economic crisis. And I mentioned that one of the long-term strategies will be to try to keep the international economy moving through trade and investment. Canada's long experience is that international trade and international investment are like the twin engines of the global economy and of our national economy. They help to keep people employed and help create new jobs, make the economy more competitive, provide a higher standard of living for everyone in the country. So we're quite dedicated to international trade, international investment. We are the only G7 country with a free trade agreement with every other G7 country. We have free trade with the United States through the North American Free Trade Agreement, through with the European Union. We have free trade with Japan through the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, now called the CPTPP, the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, which also includes, by the way, Vietnam and Singapore. But unfortunately, we have no special trade arrangement with Indonesia. And it's one of the things that I would like to change as ambassador. I think the time has come for us to take that $4 billion trading relationship and strengthen it and increase that trade even more. Frankly, I would like to see even more Canadian wheat in Indonesia, and I would like to see even more Indonesian clothing, footwear, apparel, high-tech products, manufactured goods. We need them in Canada. So we should be encouraging investment going both ways as well. I think the best way to do that would be to have a trade agreement between us, some kind of a free trade agreement. So we're thinking about that now with the Indonesian government. And one of the things we've done is a study. Actually, we did an economic study of whether Indonesia would benefit from such an agreement. And that study shows that Indonesia's economy would grow by $7 billion if you had free trade with Canada. So we think that's, especially as an economic recovery tool after the post-pandemic, this is exactly the sort of policy decision we think the two governments should make going forward is to have a trade agreement.
Thank you, Ambassador. For our next question from UNS, we have Maria Lely.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes. A bit loud though. Could you move closer to the mic?
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it better now?
Yes.
So thank you for the opportunity. I have a question. based on the statement of the Mr. Ambassador before, that all of the people that live in Canada has the same opportunity to get any kind of public services. So is there any rules or maybe any specification for people, especially for or maybe for people that live in Canada to have or to get the public services that they need, maybe for how to make, is there any possibilities for us, especially for students that studying in Canada, to make the new bank account or maybe to get hospital services? Thank you.
I had some difficulty hearing that question. Would you be able to repeat it and summarize it in one sentence? I'm not quite sure. I couldn't hear very well.
I'm so sorry because I'm nearby street, so maybe there is a lot of noisy voice there. So my question is there any possibility for students, that, especially for foreign students that live in Canada, to make any kind of new bank account in Canada, or maybe to get any kind of hospital services?
I think it would help if you turned off your video while asking your question, because with the video it was a bit choppy. So you don't have to use the video; you can just use the audio. And unmute your mic. Yes.
Okay, I'm so sorry because I'm nearby street now. Maybe you probably hear noisy voice over here. So here is my question based on the Mr. Ambassador statement before, that there is a lot of people that live in Canada has the same opportunity or right to get any kind of public services. So is there any rules or maybe specification for people, especially for students that live in Canada, for foreign students, to get any kind of, to make a bank account, a new bank account, or maybe to get such a hostel service or maybe public service? Thank you.
Cindy, did you understand the question?
Right. I think
Is there a
if I could maybe summarize, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Her question was, as a foreigner living in Canada, especially foreign students, would they be able to receive the same public services or facilities as Canadian citizens? For instance, would they be able to make a bank account, et cetera, et cetera?
Right.
And I think by saying that, she's asking were there any specific requirements for them to get the public services as the same as Canadians?
So that's a very good question. It's actually quite a detailed response, and I'm not sure I have all the answers. But basically, if you're a student studying in Canada, then absolutely all of these basic services are available to you. So yes, bank account, public transportation system, telephones, of course, all of those are available to you and at the same price as for Canadians. Maybe one distinction is healthcare. Also for healthcare, as part of your student package, you would be considered, you would be covered by the Canadian healthcare system, as long as you're there legitimately with a student visa. So it all depends on what kind of visa you have. But if you're there with a proper student visa, then yes, you have healthcare coverage. And then to have all of the broader, longer term benefits of being a Canadian, you would need to have permanent residency status or eventually become a Canadian citizen. And frankly, many foreign students do decide to stay in Canada, become permanent residents, and then become citizens and get Canadian passports, et cetera. And they take that path toward Canadian citizenship, which we very much welcome. There are certainly some requirements, and it takes some time to do that, but it's quite a common outcome of studying in Canada. So broadly speaking, the answer to your question is yes, these public services are available to you.
All right, thank you. I hope that answers your question, Maria. And for the next question from UMS, we have Aprilia Firdaus.
Thank you. I would like to ask about what are the things that have to be prepared to become a good diplomat based on your experience? Thank you.
Some of them. So what do you need to be, well prepared to be a diplomat? A big part of it is attitude. And I mentioned earlier that I think part of being an important part of being a good diplomat is the willingness to open your mind and see the world the way someone else sees the world. So a big part of my job here is to understand Indonesia and Indonesians and how Indonesians think, and to be able to translate that back to my colleagues in my capital city in Ottawa, who don't know Indonesia and who don't understand it very well, and who sometimes will be surprised by the things that Indonesians say or the positions that the Indonesian government takes. They will say, why on earth would they want this or that? And my job as ambassador is to translate back to them. Let me explain to you how Indonesians see the world, why they want the things that they want. And then it makes it easier once Canadians understand that for us to arrive at an agreement. If we're negotiating a treaty or a resolution at the United Nations, if we better understand Indonesia, we can cooperate with you better. Academically, I think certainly in the Canadian system, to be a diplomat, it's important to have a university degree. Most Canadian diplomats have advanced university degrees, a master's degree, a law degree. These are very helpful academic background to have. In our own system, we have no restrictions on what or requirements in terms of your academic training. We have some Canadian diplomats have majored in literature, and others in economics, others in law, some in business. We have engineers from all academic backgrounds. It's possible to be a diplomat. But I think law, economics, international relations, and political science are maybe the most typical academic backgrounds for a Canadian diplomat.
All right, thank you. Our next question from UMS, we have Nariza Ayu Pasha.
Good afternoon, sir. Can you hear my voice well?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank for this honorable opportunity so I can join this discussion with you, Canada Ambassador. And my question is, how about the cooperation between Canada and Indonesia in education in this pandemic? I mean, how about the international student, both in Indonesia and Canada, for now, during this pandemic, and for the future, if the pandemic is still going on? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mentioned earlier that at any given time last year, we had 2,000-3,000 Indonesians studying in Canada at any given time. We, before the pandemic, twice a year, the Canadian Embassy would organize and host outreach seminars where representatives of Canadian universities, colleges, secondary schools, vocational institutes would travel to Indonesia, and we had a kind of an education fair in a hotel lobby in Jakarta or Surabaya or Medan to try to attract Indonesian students to Canada and explain in great detail what the possibilities are for studying in Canada. Obviously, those in-person meetings have needed to stop, but we are doing them now instead online. So I think it was early in June. We had an online education fair, again, with representatives of universities and post-secondary educational institutions, we call them, from across Canada, online with students from across Indonesia answering their questions about about study in Canada. So our cooperation has certainly changed because of the pandemic, but it hasn't stopped. We did need to, we stopped for a certain period of time issuing student visas to Canada, but that has recently started up again. So we're doing our best to get back to normal and to welcome people back into Canada for study. Our next education fair, again online, will be in October of this year. And I'll ask my staff actually will send to this distribution to you students information about that after this call.
Thank you, Ambassador. Our next question we have from UMS, Umi Fatima. Okay, Umi has a question here through the chat box. She's asking, would an individual be able to work outside of Canada? Oh, sorry. Would students be able to work as an Indonesian graduate? Would they be able to work in Canada? For instance, a pharmaceutical student that would like to work in a Canadian hospital, would that be possible?
That's a complicated question to answer, especially that example of working in a hospital. What I can say is that if you are an Indonesian student with a student visa in Canada, there are provisions that will allow you to work, or you can get a visa that will allow you to work part-time. The purpose of your travel to Canada cannot be to work, it must be to study. But with limitations on the numbers of hours you can work per week, then yes, you can work. In terms of working in a hospital as a pharmacy student, again, if you came from Indonesia after graduating and then wanted to get a job in Canada, you're no longer a student. You need a working a work permit and a visa that allows for that. If you are a student of pharmacy or medicine in Canada and you want to work in a hospital, I don't know, but I suspect arrangements can be made. Your academic institution would need to support it, and the hospital, of course, would need to want that kind of student labor. And for further detail, I'd have to check.
Thank you, Ambassador. For our next question, from UNS, we have Ananda Ramadhani Putri.
Hello. Can you?
Hello.
We can hear.
Yes.
First of all, thank you for this opportunity. And I wanted to ask, as you said earlier, that there's a lot of international students that came to Canada to study. And as I heard that recently, Canada is planning to lift the international students' travel restrictions. And regarding that, is there any benefit or challenges by Canada making that decision? Thank you.
Is there any benefit to making the decision?
Or any challenges?
So there are challenges. The challenge is simply the COVID pandemic and the fact that we have had very restrictive rules about travel into Canada since the pandemic started. So it is currently, or it has not been possible up to now to travel into Canada other than for a so-called essential purpose. So no tourism. We were not allowing new students in. You could only come to Canada if you were traveling for an essential purpose, like providing healthcare, conducting trade, delivering medical supplies, that sort of thing. If you were a Canadian returning, of course, you were allowed in as a citizen. And at that time, we weren't providing visas for anyone to travel for any other reason. We're just now beginning to open that up a little bit more. And I think students will will be the first, because they are traveling in a sense for an essential purpose to come to Canada and study. When they arrive, they'll need to self-quarantine for 2 weeks. No tourist wants to come and self-quarantine for 2 weeks and then leave, but students, that should be entirely possible. You self-quarantine for 2 weeks and then you complete your studies. So there are all kinds of reasons now why the Canadian government is moving toward allowing, again, the flow of students into Canada.
All right. For the next question from Irma April, she's asking through the chat box, how does the Canadian government see the Indonesian state in the midst of this pandemic? And what is the Canadian government's response for Indonesia during this pandemic? Does this affect relations and cooperation between our two countries or not? And what should be done to reduce the emphasis caused by this pandemic?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Well, I think, in fact, the pandemic has brought Canada and Indonesia even closer together from a diplomatic point of view and from a government-to-government point of view. Our foreign ministers, for example, through April, May, June, July, every 3 or 4 weeks, the Canadian foreign minister was hosting a telephone call, and Ibu Retno Marsudi, the Indonesian foreign minister, participated, and I mentioned earlier, led the discussions on private sector supply chains and how to keep them open. So in that sense, because we have so much in common as so-called middle powers, we're not the United States of America, we're not China, we're these middle power countries that want the international system to work. We need the United Nations to function. We need the World Trade Organization to function. We all support the WHO, et cetera. So in that sense, we've worked even more closely together than ever, I would say. So there's been no negative impact on Canada-Indonesia relations as a result of the pandemic, other than the very normal things like, frankly, there's no real travel between the two countries, not in any significant numbers. Tourism, has dropped to zero. These sorts of things, but business continues to flow. Trade will be impacted, trade will decline, but it certainly will not disappear. Canada still needs Indonesia's exports, including clothing and rubber and manufactured goods, and Indonesia still needs Canadian wheat and potash and manufactured goods. So I would say the impact on our relationship has been overall, in a strange way, kind of positive.
All right, thank you. Our next question, we have Yunita Ariputri from Unisri.
Okay, I would like to ask next question. Thank you for the opportunity. So my question is, based on this pandemic situation, we already know that all the nations have their own problematically focus on the economy subject. Also for Canada, and which joined on some free trade agreements, namely USMCA with Mexico and USA. How USMCA has taken action on the situation for each member to guide in the trade framework? Thank you.
Could you just repeat the last part of your question about the USMCA and?
Okay. How can USMCA take an action on the situation for each member to guiding for the trade framework? Is it?
I'm not sure I understand the question really.
Okay, I'll repeat it once more. So based on this pandemic situation, we already know that all the nations have their own problematically focused on the economy subject. Also for Canada, which join on some free trade agreements, namely USMCA with Mexico and USA. And how USMCA has taken action on the situation for each member to guiding the trade framework.
Guiding the trade, what is the last word you said? Guiding the trade?
Trade framework. Framework.
Maybe I can say, so the North American Free Trade Agreement, which we initially negotiated it started with the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement, which became the North American Free Trade Agreement when Mexico joined in the early 1990s. That agreement between the three countries completely transformed the North American economy. It made the North American economy between Canada, US, and Mexico much more competitive. Standards of living rose in all three countries. There was a very difficult adjustment for industries that were unable to compete. There were certainly some businesses and some industries in some of our countries that went into decline because they were not competitive. But there were far more businesses and sectors that grew very significantly because suddenly they had a very large market to sell to and very few barriers to trade. So it was overall a very positive story for all three countries. President Trump, when he took office, made it a priority that he thought that the trade agreement was unbalanced in favor of Canada and Mexico. He wanted to renegotiate the agreement. We agreed to do so. We did take almost 2 years, a year and a half to renegotiate it. It also at that time got renamed or rebranded, the USMCA, the United States, Mexico, Canada Agreement, which is what it is called in the United States. In Canada, we call it the Canada-US Mexico Agreement, the CUSMA, a different name. We put Canada first, but there were some changes to the new agreement, but they were not terribly significant. Some changes to the rules of origin, some impact on the auto sector, basically making the agreement more favorable to people who produced within North America and less favorable to people who produced goods outside of North America, that they should not benefit from the agreement as much as they had in the past. We continue to be very proud of this agreement. The new agreement came into force on July the 1st of this year. Canadians and the Canadian business community in particular, very supportive of the agreement. It gives us and the US and Mexico continued preferential access to one another's markets, which continues to keep the North American economy basically one of the most competitive economies in the world. And it is Canada's objective now to take this kind of model of freer trade, eliminate tariffs, eliminate non-tariff barriers, open up the market to more services, et cetera, protect intellectual property, encourage foreign investment. These things have worked very well within North America. It's for that reason we have a very similar agreement with Europe, and we have a similar agreement with Asian countries, including Japan, Vietnam, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand through the CPTPP. So we think all of these agreements establish a very good framework for business and trade, the purpose of which is to raise the standard of living for individuals. I mean, the purpose of trade is not trade for the sake of trade or trades for the sake of business getting richer. The purpose is to raise the standard of living of your citizens. And for Canadians, trade and investment has absolutely done that, and we'd like to do more of it, including with Indonesia.
Thank you, Ambassador. For the next question, we have Sally Rosiana. Could you state your name and your university, please?
Sorry, I can't.
Sorry, we can't hear you. No. Could you maybe take off your headphones? Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Ambassador, for this opportunity. My name is Sally, and I am from Slamet Riyadi University. I once saw an image on the internet, a Canadian demonstrant holding a board with "I'm a little bit upset" sentence written on it. I think it is a very humble way to express his angriness, emotion. Everyone on the comment section is agree that Canadian people are nice. I think it is an interesting aspect for Canada tourism to attract tourists from other countries. And my question is, how can the government promote this positive value as its soft power? Thank you. Is it clear enough?
I think so. And I think I'll go back to some of what I said in my presentation about the issue of tolerance and cooperation and people needing to get along and be polite with one another. Even if they disagree with one another, we should be polite and tolerate that other person's point of view, et cetera, and listen very carefully to what they have to say, even if we disagree. So these values really run deep in Canadian culture. They're absolutely ingrained in the Canadian Constitution and our system of government at all levels, nationally and provincially. And so, of course, we're not unique in that way. There are many other countries. I would argue that most other countries also value these aspects of human interaction, of tolerance and cooperation, et cetera. But we do, in many ways, try to make it kind of a Canadian brand. You know, we joke about Canadians being extremely polite and supportive of one another and cooperative, et cetera. I think it has made, especially in the past, it made Canada quite successful diplomatically. We have a good reputation at the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, et cetera, for being, for an ability to really listen to what other people are saying, countries from around the world, and then try to see where is the compromise that we could all agree to. I mentioned as well in my presentation about, you know, well, I touched on it, the founding countries of England and France, and immigrants from England and France settling in a country that had already been settled by Aboriginal peoples. So right from the beginning, Canada and Canadians needed to find a way for everyone to get along. And that's become very much part of our DNA. We're very proud of it, and we've been quite successful with that. So I'm glad you brought up the example.
All right, and our second to last question, we have Monica Purdiani from UMS.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity, sir. I would like to ask a question about refugee. As we know, in order to come to Canada as a refugee, they have to be offered by the United Nations Refugee Agency or a referral organization or a private sponsorship group first. Is it that easy? And how did Canada respond to refugees? Thank you.
So Canada has a relatively generous system of accepting refugees. I will not say it's perfect. We have problems with it, but we are quite open to refugees. We've signed on to the International Convention on Refugees from the 1950s. We take very seriously our obligations to live up to that. We have an advantage in the sense in Canada that our most porous border is the border with the United States of America, and we do not have large numbers of refugees coming from the United States. We do have some. And then other than that, we're surrounded by the Arctic in the north and then two oceans on either side. So so-called source countries for refugees are relatively far away from Canada. And that makes it relatively easy for us to work with the relevant UN agencies in foreign countries to identify refugees abroad who would be, who we think would successfully fit into Canadian society. And then when we do bring them in, they get, compared to other countries, relatively generous support from the Canadian government. And we also allow families and small groups to sponsor refugees themselves. So this so-called private sponsorship of refugees is one of our most successful refugee programs, where small groups in a mosque or a church can go to the Canadian government and say, we would like to sponsor a family of refugees from the war in Syria, for example. And when they come to Canada, we will help them find an apartment. We will help to provide them with food for the first 6 months or so. We will help to register the children in school. We will help to ensure that the parents and the kids can get some English or French lessons. And we as a mosque or a church or a community group or just a group of friends or a family commit to support a refugee family this way. And this model of private sponsorship has been quite successful for us. I know other countries are looking at doing the same thing. So we take our international obligations on refugees very seriously. We try to be as generous as we can be. And we recognize what a serious and increasing problem the refugee problem is globally, and we try to live up to our own commitments and be responsible about those issues.
All right. And our last question from Satria Citra Kusuma.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Satria Citra Kusuma, and since the pandemic has happened in all over the country in the world, I always keep updated in COVID-19 news. And I saw a few weeks ago, Canada has flattened the curve pandemic, has flattened the coronavirus curve pandemic. And the question is why and how Canada, the question is how and why Canada coronavirus performance is better than the most countries in the world, and especially in the US.
I think that's an interesting question. And the answer, I'm not sure I know for sure the entire answer, because we're still in the middle of the pandemic, I should say, and it's not over yet. So things could get worse in Canada again, and we're very worried about that. But it is the case, and I mentioned earlier, that for the most part, as soon as the WHO declared a global pandemic, the Canadian national government and the provincial governments acted very quickly, initiated a lockdown immediately, closed the borders except for essential travel. We absolutely kept the borders open for trade, for medical supplies, for medical professionals, but we stopped tourism in order to control movement. We issued stay-at-home orders for individual Canadians. Everybody stayed home. And I think all Canadian political leaders, from Prime Minister to the premiers of all of the provinces in Canada are quite powerful. The Prime Minister and all of the premiers immediately turned to science and to healthcare professionals, and typically their chief public health officer, and said, you are the professional, you understand epidemiology and public health, what's your advice? And those public health professionals gave advice to the political leaders, and the leaders said, okay, that's what we will do. If you say lockdown, we will lock down. If you say wear masks, we'll wear masks. If you say people need to stay at home, we'll stay at home. And Canadians, maybe back to us being polite and tolerant, we also kind of follow instructions, and we've democratically elected our leaders, and we generally trust them to make good decisions. And I think most Canadians would agree that most Canadian political leaders at every level made good decisions early on. They were very transparent. They never hid any information. They got on TV every night and told everybody the truth, and told people you need to stay at home or this pandemic will overwhelm the Canadian health system. And indeed, we were able to more or less flatten the curve. There are still some small clusters and outbreaks in Canada, and when that's happening, the governments are responding quite quickly. So frankly, we're, I think, quite proud of the fact that our system of government and our system of Canadian values worked pretty well. We're not unique in that regard. I think New Zealand, of course, is an outstanding example of not just flattening the curve, but eliminating the virus. New Zealand is a small island country. It's quite unique in that regard. Canada can't possibly replicate that, but there are other countries around the world who have also done an outstanding job. I would say Japan, Korea, etc. But it's not over yet, and there's still a great debate in the Canadian, across Canada, about how and whether to reopen schools in September. Our normal school year starts in September. Restaurants are beginning to reopen, but on a very restricted basis. we're doing it very slowly, and I think governments are prepared to clamp down again if the situation gets out of control. And then you've all seen in the media, this situation in the United States was quite different, and the reaction of many Americans was quite different than the reaction of Canadians. So there are some real differences in the outcomes.
All right. So thank you very much, everybody, for the enthusiasm and for all your questions. But I think we can cut it there. I'm sure everyone has many questions, but unfortunately, we can't take them all because of time constraints. But thank you, Ambassador MacKay, and thank you to all the students for your questions. So before we go on, I would please allow me to highlight 8 points from our discussion today. Firstly, Canada is extremely diverse, from its geography to its people. Tolerance is in the DNA of Canadians, and Canadians do not tolerate hate, racial-based discrimination, and Canadians are multiculturally rich. Canada is also open to immigrants and has a friendly environment for everyone, and the Canadian government provides all necessary public services such as education, health, and also helps its population with job employment. The second point is that Canada sees the pandemic as not only a public health crisis, but also an economic crisis, and it is affecting domestic politics and geopolitics. Many countries responded to the pandemic with a me-first attitude, which is increasing protectionism, isolationism, and weakening multilateralism. Meanwhile, Canada will always promote the rules-based international order. The third point is that Indonesia and Canada will always work together to promote multilateralism, such as in G20 and APEC. In G20, Canada and Indonesia focuses in providing equal medical supplies at the time of pandemic and enhance efforts to provide and support the access of supply chain in relation to health supplies. At the UN, we, Indonesia and Canada, can be seen from the cooperation under 2 foreign ministries that have committed to create global peace, advance gender equality, solve climate change, and strengthen the value of multilateralism. Number 4 is that different countries have different interests and desires, and the challenges are real in making all parties agree on the common agenda. That is the most challenging task for a diplomat like Ambassador MacKay. And the fifth point is that in the short term, the economic challenge by this health crisis is contained by government policies of Indonesia and Canada in helping citizens to anticipate the economic downfall. Over the long term, the big challenge caused by COVID-19 is to sustain our economic recovery, and the economic agenda, like green infrastructure, green economy, needs to be continued. Canada tries to avoid and mitigates the risk of economic depression through their economic strategies. The sixth point is that on the Canada and US relationship, both nations have many common similarities. Both are North Americans, sharing the same language, and both are 2 of the largest democratic nations with advanced industries. In fact, the world's largest trade relationship is between the US and Canada, and there are differences. One of them, their political system, is more similar to the UK. Sometimes they disagree with the US stance, but Canadians are not afraid to tell them they're wrong. Number 7 is that recently tensions between US and China are increasing. Canada disagrees with China in many spheres, the rules of law, on the issue of Hong Kong, South China Sea, and other issues in the level of governments. But Ambassador MacKay can assure us that relations between its people remains good. And lastly, Ambassador MacKay told us how Canada can be successful in embracing multiculturalism. Canada is the country with immigrants from all around the world, and Canadians have built a cooperative society. And Ambassador MacKay agrees that the Indonesian model is impressive since our independence. Indonesian founding fathers has incredibly built the core principle, which is religious tolerance through our Pancasila. So that's it from me. And now, as I mentioned before, the Canadian Embassy has prepared a fun quiz for us. So Bapak Fajar of the Embassy will be leading the quiz. So Pak Fajar, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cindy. And thank you, everybody, for such a great session. It's such a great questions from all of you. So now it's our turn to ask you some questions. Has everybody followed us on Instagram? If you haven't done so, I encourage you to do so, because I'm going to ask you a few questions whose answers can be found on our Instagram. It's @Canada in Indonesia. So Cindy will help me select the person who will respond to the question. So is everybody ready?
Be sure to follow.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. So the first question, you can find the answer on our Instagram. So the first question, Anne of the Green Gables is one of the most famous characters coming out of Canada. Anne of the Green Gables is one of the most famous characters coming out of Canada. It has been written into novels in many languages as well as in movies and TV series. Now, from which Canadian province Anne of Green Gables comes from?
If you know the answer, please raise your hand and I will choose the first one. So make sure to stalk at Canada in Indonesia to find the answer. Because if you answer this correctly and you answer this first, then we will be sending you prizes from the embassy.
It's right on top. Anybody? Do I see any raised hands? Winners will receive a package of eco-friendly souvenirs from the Canadian Embassy. So,
all right.
We
From
got
UNS,
someone here.
We have Rafli Zahran. So what is your answer? Rafli?
Hello. Okay. Hi.
Yes. Do you know the answer? I don't think we can connect to Rafli at the moment. If anyone else wants to raise their hand. Okay, we have Ainal Hasna from UMS. What is your answer? Ainal Hasna from UMS.
Hi, is it Prince Edward Island?
Prince Edward Island. Are you sure?
Yeah.
Yes, you're correct. Congratulations. Yeah, so Anne of the Green Gables is a famous character coming from Canada, and and the story is based out of the province of Prince Edward Island, which is also Canada's smallest province. All right, now next question. All right. You've probably heard the answer in Ambassador MacKay's presentation earlier. So I'm going to give you multiple answers. You just have to choose the correct answer. So which Canadian city has over half of its population born outside Canada? Is it A, Vancouver, B, Montreal, C, Toronto, D, Calgary, or E, Edmonton?
All right.
Which Canadian city has over half of its population born outside of Canada? Oh, I see a raised hand there.
We have Hussein Ali from UMS. What is your answer? Hussein Ali? I'll give you 5 seconds to answer.
Are you there?
And if you don't hear anything, then we're going to have to move on because we have a lot here. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Cindy Yanwar Wibowo, what is your answer?
Maybe it's Toronto.
Toronto.
Is that a guess?
Is that a guess, or did you listen to Ambassador's presentation? Yeah, because you're correct. It's Toronto. Toronto is Canada's largest city, and over half of its population were born outside of Canada. So congratulations. All right.
All right, hands down, and we'll move on to the next question.
Okay. Now, the next question, back to Instagram. When is Canada's Multiculturalism Day? Okay. When is Canada's Multiculturalism Day? Is it June 23rd, 24th, 25th, 26th, or 27th?
From UMS, Monica Purdiani.
It's June 27.
27?
Yes.
No. Not correct.
Wrong answer.
Sorry.
All right. So our next person who has raised their hand, Kairi Saptiawan from UNS.
We'll take 2 more answers. So
Kairi Saptiawan. We'll give you 5.
okay, go ahead.
Try unmuting your
I think you're,
audio. There you go.
Is it June 26?
June 26. Did you just guess that?
I think you Googled it.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're correct. It's the June 26. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right.
Congratulations.
Good. Wow. Solo is on fire. Good. Okay. Now, the 4th question. All right.
Hands down.
Our head of state is currently Queen Elizabeth II, but she is represented by a Governor General in Canada. The current Governor General is Madame Julie Payette. Now, Madame Julie Payette, our current Governor General, is a former A, journalist, B, actress, C, singer, D, novelist, or E, astronaut.
Fibian Afla from UMS.
Okay, Fibian?
The answer?
Astronaut. Astronaut.
Astronaut.
Former astronaut, yes.
You're very confident.
Yes. So, because I love astronaut or space.
Yes, you're correct. So our current Governor General, Madam Julie Payette, she's a former astronaut. So congratulations. All right.
Very quick.
So, all right, last question. Which of these Canadian artists performed the last in Indonesia? Which of these Canadian artists performed the last in Indonesia? Is it A, Shawn Mendes, B, Michael Bublé, C, Justin Bieber, D, Bryan Adams, or E, Celine Dion? Raise your hand.
Sally
Ooh.
Rosiana, do you know the answer?
Can answer that.
Sally, where are you?
My network bandwidth is slow. Can
All right,
you hear
no problem.
me?
I can, yeah, I can hear you.
Is it Michael Bublé? Michael Bublé?
Michael Bublé, are you sure? No, it's not
Yes,
Michael
I
Bublé.
guess.
Sorry, it's not Michael Bublé. Another.
Okay, so from UNS, Rafli Zahran.
Okay, Rafli. Are you there?
Rafli, if we don't hear you in 5, 4. Oh,
Okay, he
asking in the chat box.
The chat box.
Is it Shawn Mendes?
It's Shawn Mendes. Yes, it was Shawn Mendes. He performed the last in Indonesia. It was in October. So yeah, so congratulations everybody. Good job. So yeah, thank you again for taking part in this quiz. Thank you.
Congratulations, everybody. So if you were one of the winners, please send us your details and we will send the prizes to you. And okay, thank you, Pak Fajar. So before we close today's discussion, we have closing remarks. So now may I invite the Director of the Center for Cultural Studies and Social Change of Universitas Muhammadiyah Surakarta, Ibu Dr. Andes Yayah Kisbiah, MA. Yes.
Okay, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, Bu.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and especially His Excellency Ambassador of Canada to Indonesia, Mr. Cameron MacKay. Thank you so much for fascinating presentation today. I think I myself got a lot of inspiration from your fascinating and very informative presentation. And I also thank the Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia and the joint host of this event from UMS, 11 Maret, Universitas Diponegoro, Unisri, and others. I think this presentation by the Ambassador of Canada, for me, made my day. Not only made my day, but also made my week, even my month. I follow many webinars before, but this particular one highlights so many important issues. Ambassador Cameron MacKay, I don't know whether he's still here with us.
Yes, I am.
Okay, I cannot see you from my monitor, but I'm glad you're still with us. Yes, you highlight so many important issues and you take us to a very, very informative and inspiring journey of data, of facts of your country. Well, to inform a little bit for you all about myself, I was trained in the United States for my master's and in Europe for my diploma degrees in peace studies and conflict resolution. But actually, my mind was always wander away to Canada when we discuss about peacemaking, peace building, culture of peace, multiculturalism, with Canada having no military force and no military intervention in any countries. I think Canada is one of the best countries that can be the beacon, the paragon for all of us. You mentioned about the differences of cultures, which every country, even within one country, we have cultural differences. But what makes each country perform differently is the governance system, the government system, and you highlight that very eloquently and very vividly, clearly to us that the governance system in Canada that embraces social democracy already provide the best for its people, but not only to Canadian people, but also to other international communities. With an example of Canada already gave donation support through its Red Cross, etc., to other countries during this pandemic. And I think the students of many universities in Central Java, especially around Solo, very enriched by your presentation. Your presentation is very rich, took us from cultural differences to opportunities in the future and how to navigate youth future for the education, for the work force, etc. For humanity, you highlight that too. So I think, again, I should mention on behalf of UMS, especially the Center for the Study of Culture and Social Change, deep gratitude to FPCI, and in particular to our presenter today, His Excellency Ambassador MacKay. And for the youth, students from various universities who participate in this webinar, please remember these keywords that Ambassador MacKay shared with us. Open your mind, have a good attitude, listen to others, and compromise amidst inevitable differences. And when the ambassador mentioned that Canadian people, first of all, turn into science and listen to healthcare providers in dealing with pandemic, I think that's a very, very important and very useful and already successful suggestion for us in dealing with the pandemic. Other matters such as economy and also the welfare for all will follow after we listen to science and we pick ourselves up from the ground after being scattered by the pandemic. I think that's my closing remark. Adding to what's already being summarized very precisely by the beautiful and smart moderator, Sister Cindy Mandagi. Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador, and thank you, Vivian, for being a good host representing OMS, and thank you for all. Good afternoon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Ibu. And with that, I would like to give the floor back to Ambassador MacKay for his closing statement, or if you have any message that you would like to give the students.
Cindy, thank you so much. And Ibu, thank you for those really warm comments. And I do hope that I can meet you one day, maybe in Canada. I'm glad that you're such a fan of my country, as I am of Indonesia. So thank you very much for those closing remarks. Cindy, thanks to you for an excellent job as a host and a facilitator, and your summary of my presentation was terrific. Thank you for that. But again, mostly I want to thank all of the students who took some time today out of their own busy schedules to spend some time with me, to put to me some often very challenging and difficult questions. I did my best to respond to them, and I do hope that I can meet you one day in person, maybe in Solo, maybe in Jakarta, maybe in Canada in the future. You all have very bright futures ahead of you, and I look forward to seeing you again somewhere, somehow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And with that, we have come to the close of our ambassadorial lecture today. Once again, thank you to His Excellency Ambassador Cameron MacKay for your time, and everybody from our FPCI chapters in Surakarta. Now, before we wrap up, however, I would like to invite everybody to join a virtual photo shoot. So I ask everyone to please turn on their videos and smile at the camera, and our operator will take a picture. So Wahyu.
So hello everybody, I'm Wahyu, and I will take a screenshot for today's event. So please, for everyone who has not been turned on their camera, it's your time to shine. And I will give you a baba. So in 3, 2, 1, you pose, and then I will take a picture, okay? So
and don't forget to smile.
Yes, and don't forget to smile. Okay, so for the first round, everybody in 3, 2, and 1, cheese. Okay. And then for the second round, again, everybody, your best pose in 3, 2, and 1, say cheese. Once again, stay hold. 3, 2, 1. Again, we still have a lot of people. And the last batch, again, everybody, your best pose in 3, 2, and 1. Say cheese. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Ayu.
Thank you, Ambassador. We'll see you in our future events, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you, Boo.